Okay, welcome back. We are back this week, and we're going to be talking about coronavirus, the economy, and whatever else doctors are talking about. What's our motto, Disha?
What's Up Docs, where we discuss what's Blah! This is so hard. Let's take two.
Take two. Take two.
What's Up Docs, where we discuss what doctors are talking about on social media right now.
All right, I like it. Again, this is a work in progress, as anyone who's watching will see. But mostly, it's about the content, not about necessarily our delivery. We're still working, right? So,
yeah, if you have suggestions, that
yes.
would be open to it. We've been going back and forth on this for 2 days now,
I know.
or at least 2 different days.
Hey, you know what? This is why we're doctors, right? We're not
Right.
social media experts by any stretch, so we're working on it. But that's okay. This is how you get better.
That's right.
So this week, obviously, the big topic on everyone's mind is coronavirus, and what impact it's having. You hear stories about people hoarding, supplies. I was talking to a physician friend of mine who was at a conference here in Arizona last week, and one of the physician lecturers kind of took some of the people aside, and they were coming from New York City, and they were saying, "Hey, I've got some friends, in the pharmaceutical industry, blah blah blah," and they were like, "You need to, stock up on supplies." I was like, "Oh my goodness, that's crazy." I mean, it's possible. Who knows, right? Apparently,
Right.
the supply chain for pharmaceuticals has a lot of tie, especially with basic pharmaceuticals, has some ties in with in China, and so they were worried about disruptions. I don't know what that is, and we're not recommending anything like that with this show. But it was just an interesting thought, because I was like, in the early days of these kind of scenarios where no one really knows, information's not clear, um, everyone is susceptible to some kind of behavior that they're looking back, a month, a week from now, whenever we do have more information, you're going to be like, oh man, I shouldn't have said that, or, oh, I should have acted even more, um, uh, you know, uh, to protect myself. We don't know. And that's the bottom line, is we don't know. We're recording this on March 3rd, 2020, and information is constantly changing. Last week, there was some insane reactions in the stock market, as we we're going to talk about. In the downside, we went down almost, I think, 12% for the S&P during the week. So it was, a violent reaction. I think the most point loss in 1 week, and a pretty significant percentage loss too. And so people were talking about that on our various physician media groups. So I know you had some thoughts about that.
Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to start with saying, all of this is reactionary right now, and the biggest problems that are being caused by this virus are, I mean, yes, there have been deaths, and yes, it is infecting. However, let's try not to panic. Panicking and hoarding supplies that causes more problems. The Surgeon General recently, released something I saw where they're asking people not to buy masks because that's creating a shortage for healthcare workers, and we can't get enough masks for hospitals and people on the front line, and which will then spread the virus even faster. And I think we should probably talk about the masks itself at some point and how useful they are in preventing this virus. And then also the fact that this virus really looks like the cold. And so how do we even go about how do we prevent its spread? Well, how do we prevent the spread of the cold, right? We wash our hands, we cover our cough, and try to avoid avoid close contact with people that are sick, and take care of ourselves. And that's how we're going to prevent it. Now, um, as far as what the stock market is doing in its response is a very interesting phenomenon. I'd love to, I don't know, we could go so many different ways with that.
It's true. I mean, again, the stock market is obviously, a lot of people will tell you that all the information at any given point is priced into the stock market. And so whenever new information comes out, that's what the stock market reacts to. Um, I don't know if I completely agree with that. That's part of the, there is still some human psyche, and humans, uh, while there's a lot of computerized trading and algorithms,
Hmm.
uh, ultimately humans are the ones who input these algorithms.
Right.
And so I think there is some definite reactionary things to it. If you look on an individual stock basis, you could even see much more of that rather than the market as a whole. Um, and so last week we saw, pretty significant swings. You were talking a little bit before we went online about the stock of Gilead, which is a biotech company that makes a lot of a variety of medications. They're best known for their Hep C cure, but last week there was some information that said that they were working on uh, a vaccine or a cure or something.
Vaccine for the coronavirus.
Right.
Yeah.
So let me just put up the stock the chart here. This is from Google Finance, but basically. Over the actually let's put it over the month, so mostly Gilead has been hanging it around in the 60s for a while, and then again last week it spiked up because of you know potential cure, or
Vaccine.
working on something, vaccine, right? And so um, it just shows you that again no one really knew the information. It just, you see violent swings in this individual stock, but we saw that in a lot of things. Now Gilead is actually, for the long run, it's been pretty underperforming the market since 2016. They had, I think, cured that, they had provided the Hep C cure way back in 2015, and actually kind of got punished for that because cures in the pharma world were not seen as good business. It was a one-time thing as opposed to ongoing treatment. So as we can see,
Mm,
a stock of their, the 5-year chart was back 120 many years ago, and down into the 60s, up until recently, up until last week. So again, we're not advocating anyone purchasing the stock. Just this was an example of pretty significant movements, and also another one, since you brought up masks, 3M. They make the N95 mask
mhm,
that is the one that people seem to be hoarding, because that's the mask that healthcare workers need, and we generally have been using it for TB and those kind of things.
mhm,
And
mhm.
and that stock similarly had underperform, and then just again last week, boom. And those were two of the exceptions to the overall market kind of going down last week.
Right.
So the bottom line is, and I think you're going to be talking about this in an upcoming post, but everyone is. There was some people talking about, should I sell? Well, really, last week was not the time to sell.
Right. Right.
And if you have a long-term time horizon, it's a blip. It doesn't really matter.
Right. Yeah. So I think we should go back to like how stocks are evaluated and how the stock market fluctuates. Part of it is the valuation of actual companies and how much profit versus loss they have and their expense ratio and all of this. However, um, the stock market is also a bit of a popularity contest. The share value goes up because people think it's going to go higher in the future, and that's how bull markets are created. Share values go higher and higher just because people are confident. They're confident. They expect the same results from what they've been getting, and that's just a mental phenomenon where we expect the same thing we've been seeing, and that's why share prices go higher and higher and higher. And usually to the point where they're companies are overvaluated, and then there's a correction and we go back down to the price of the share as it should have been, really probably from the beginning. However, that it's kind of like trading baseball cards. Whatever's most popular becomes more expensive because people are willing to pay that price for it, but that
Mhm.
doesn't always mean that that card itself is worth anything. It's kind of, because you are trading on an open market, people's sentiments also come into play. And I think sentiment, we need, a lot of people have been predicting that a correction was coming, that the bull market's gone on for too long. And I think, the coronavirus was just the impetus for that. Um, and whether this correction lasts for a day, a week, or a year really doesn't have any standing on people that are that for young investors that are investing in the market every month, as they still have 20 to 30 years of accumulation. If people have 20 to 30 years of accumulation, they have nothing to fear from this market. This is just a correction. um, and it could be the start of a bear market, which not necessarily a bad thing, for people that are investing now. I think probably um, the worst people that would fare the worst are people that are not don't have assets allocated in a very safe fashion for their age,
Right.
and maybe people that have just retired that are subject to sequence of return risk and that are withdrawing on their portfolio at this point. That it may be a little scary there, but again, not the investor that is investing for retirement should not be panicking at this point, especially if you are invested in index funds, because at some point chances are good that things will turn around and go back up again. And as long as we don't panic and sell off all our stocks right now, we won't be hurt by it.
Right. I think it's true. I think last week was a good reminder um, that we've been expecting, like you said, people have been expecting and talking about a correction. The reality is, last week only corrected down to stuff. I think basically sometime in the late fall, the
Mm-hmm.
levels that we're at. So really, you know, you just reset the market to maybe September, October levels. This was not while it's a 10% or 12% correction is not insignificant.
Mm-hmm.
Um, this market has been on a crazy upward trajectory, and while things are going up, we all feel good. No one really questions it. It's that feeling of uncertainty, what happens last week, that got everyone thinking. And so it's the right time to really, the right time is before that happens, but it's a good reminder to adjust your risk tolerance. So if this really shook you up, then you were probably allocated too risky for your tolerance. I
Right.
wouldn't
And
advise
now is not the
anyone.
time to adjust,
Exactly,
though.
exactly. Don't make these movements when everything is kind of going crazy. But just kind of write that down. Again, like you said, if you're looking at a 20 to 30-year time horizon, this is immaterial. What happened last week? Again, I'm not saying, because I don't know what's going to happen today, tomorrow, the next year, 2 years. No one knows. But if that is your time horizon, 20 to 30 years from now, it's easy for us to say in a abstract scenario, yes, you want a bear market because you want to buy stuff when it's cheap. Yes. But when you're going through that, like many people did last week, and last week was not a bear market, it was a correction. But boy, it doesn't feel good, does it? And
No.
and so that's what people have to realize, is that it's easy to say, but it's hard to do.
Right. And this is the time to learn yourself. This is a one person game. This is a game against ourselves. And if we find ourselves freaking out right now, then we need to think about our asset allocation when we go to rebalance our portfolio. I usually rebalance at the end of the year. um, and that would be the time to think back to this time and ask yourself, do I have too much risk in my portfolio, or do I need to buy more bonds, or whatever it is, less stock, maybe I need to do more real estate, who knows, whatever your allocation would be that you would be comfortable with if the market was to tank. like you might be fearing right now, that's when to do it, not right now when the prices are plummeting and the stock prices and the share prices are down.
Right. It's, I think it's a good wake up call, definitely. And I think, again, if last week was just kind of an aberration, no one's going to remember that week in 20 years.
Hmm.
If it turns out to be something, well, okay, then if you, and especially they always say, yeah, you should hope for these kind of corrections early in your career, because you want to be buying stuff cheap. But what you brought up something earlier that I think is a good point, and that's the sequence of returns. And so that is basically what's happening to the market. It's sequence of returns risk. It's what's happening in the market at any given point, but it's critically important around the time when you are just before you're retiring and right after you're retiring. And so, that's the point that can determine a lot of stuff for you in the future. So that's when you really want to be the most. Well, some people will tell you that's when you want to be the most conservative, and then have more risk on either side of that. I don't know if that's complete. I'm not totally sold on that, but that's the scenario where you need to worry. I wouldn't make so much reactive changes before that. If you're in your early 30s and you plan on working till you're 55, 60, you got a long
Hmm.
time. And if you're in
Hmm.
your 60s, well, you probably should have been in a safer allocation to begin with if you're reacting. That said, if you are reacting and you haven't been in a safer allocation, it's just a good reminder, and hopefully this isn't the start of a huge correction, so you can have some time to understand your own psychology.
Right, right. Yeah, if the market dips and you lose, say you have $1 million portfolio and you lose 10% of that right at the beginning as you're already starting to draw down on your portfolio, that can really hurt the total, value of your portfolio initially, and then you have less to accumulate interest as you go on in your retirement. That can really hurt you. So yeah, that's basically sequence of return risk. But again, yes, there are ways you can mitigate it. You can be more conservative right when you start to retire. And then
Right,
as your portfolio builds up value over time, you can get a little bit more risky, I guess, if you want to.
right, right. And the reality is that it's going to be different for everyone. Everyone's risk tolerance is a little bit different, and if you have other sources of income coming in, that can
Mm,
also change. Again, we're not financial advisors, and we're not making
yeah.
any specific recommendations here, but those are key things, and I think it's just a good reminder to be comfortable with your market. And I like the way you put it. It's a game against yourself. You're not worried about your colleague in the doctor's lounge who bought down during the dip or sold during the dip. I mean, either
Right.
way,
Yeah.
you're worried about how it's going to impact you. So I like that. Um, One of the interesting things I think is a little bit funny is that I guess had to have been fake news, right? You sent me a link to an article, and I think it was posted on social
Totally
media
propagating the fake news.
about let me bring it up here. Uh, what is it? 40% of Americans uh, were confusing won't buy Corona due to coronavirus, Corona beer.
I think this was like an N of probably 50 people that they surveyed out of. They don't really have their p-values published in this
Right,
study, but
right.
that was hilarious. Um, so phone survey of 737 US residents considered themselves beer drinkers, that they won't buy Corona. That's hilarious.
Under any circumstances now, but of those who actually drink Corona, only 4% said they would stop drinking Corona. And I was just wondering, 38% of beer drinking would not buy Corona now. And I wondered how many of that was before, because it is the
Right?
third most,
They wouldn't
wow, I
buy
didn't
it.
realize that. The third most popular beer in the US. That's interesting. Okay.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah. I think Corona is mostly just like hanging out in the sun and like, I need something like kind of beer for me.
It's
I
like
don't
those
know about you.
commercials, right?
Yeah.
They are. that's the only thing I think about is like, I'm never like dying for a Corona beer, but I guess, yeah,
Yeah.
it does show you marketing works, I guess, because you're at the beach or something and you're like, oh yeah, okay, maybe I'll have that.
Yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, it is light, and it has a
Yeah.
lemon in it, feels fruity. Or lime.
Right, right, right. It's true.
You definitely dehydrates you in the end, though.
The
So
lime and the Corona reminds me of a funny story. Many years ago, when I was dating my wife, we went out to a restaurant on the Jersey Shore, and I, ordered a couple of Coronas, and trying to be the slick guy that I was, put the uh, put the limes into the bottle, flipped it upside
oh,
down,
yeah.
and then it sprayed all over her. And I was like, oh, that was not a very smooth move.
Oh my
So,
gosh. Yeah, I tried that once too. My thumb is too small. It doesn't cover the opening. It just kind of goes all over the place.
So
Yeah.
yeah, but that was years ago. But I think people still do that. So
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
But PSA, coronavirus is not transmitted by Corona the beer. Although I do remember, like, I think maybe it was the microbiology book that I had at the time, or was it first aid for step
oh
one?
yeah, microbiology made ridiculously simple, right? The
Yes,
cartoons.
with
Yes,
the with
yes,
the
yeah.
corona, with the rhino drinking the corona, right?
Right,
All the
right. I do
causes
remember
of the
that
cold.
too. I do remember that too. That was,
That's what I
I think
think
that was
of.
one of my favorite books in terms of, yeah, yeah, studying for the micro exams. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Total plug for that book, man. It was awesome.
Oh
We have
man,
no affiliate relationship with that
that's
company.
right. That's right. This is just talking about what's happening. So,
Yeah.
I think obviously there's new information coming out daily on the coronavirus and its manifestations, and obviously the number of cases is increasing um, worldwide,
Mm-hmm.
but we don't really have great information. And it was interesting because in radiology there was some discussion about uh, testing, CT scans kind of being a way to test for it. And it's tough because you look at the findings on CT scan, and if the person has a risk factor, you might suggest that. But most of the radiologists I talked to, myself, I'm a radiologist, obviously, we looked at the findings, and I'm like, if I just got the scan de novo without having any history, which unfortunately very commonly happens,
Mm-hmm.
it would I would have that would not be in my differential early on, because it's just such a non-specific finding. Now, I guess as cases increase, we might throw it in there, and especially if someone told us, okay, there's a history of travel or exposure. Um, but I hope people don't expect us to make that diagnosis based on CT, because there is some I think a radiologist was advocating that, and I was like, yeah, I don't see it.
Yeah, yeah. Even the diagnosis on symptoms is difficult because it's so much like a regular cold or flu,
Right,
as well. So, in general, I think the people that are most threatened by it are people that have chronic diseases and immune suppression that might be hurt by viruses in general.
right.
But yeah, it's kind of a tough thing. I think the Phi physician recently wrote a good piece on this too. Did you see that one, Jermaine?
I saw the article. I didn't have a chance to look at it, but
Let me see
you
if
can
I
bring it up, yeah, and see yeah, if or I can bring it up here. Oh, you got it? Good. Okay.
you see it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
So he's an ID doctor and writes about finances as well. And
Oh, nice.
this is a good one. Basically, you know his thing. I love how he's like, viruses are really cool. It's like such an ID doctor thing to say, but it's really well written. Um, and this is interesting. The coronavirus that causes COVID-19 is actually called SARS-CoV-2. The
Oh,
virus is not called COVID-19. The disease is called
right,
COVID-19.
right.
Um,
Okay.
and so coronavirus is basically, causes URI type symptoms: sore throat, runny nose, aches, chills, sweats. Um, and that's kind of how this starts as well. It's a zoonosis, meaning that it can go from animals to humans and vice versa. Um, and Anyway, so please
Oh
don't
yeah.
wear a mask, right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of counterintuitive, right? So the first thing is, like, people have been buying surgical masks, and those don't really do anything to protect you. I mean, if
Right.
you're coughing and sneezing, it'll keep the spit from getting to other people directly, and so
Mhm.
it's a good way to protect other people from you being sick, I guess. Which, I'm guilty of that. Like, I'll wear a surgical mask in clinic sometimes when there's like a lot of flu going around, just because it
Right.
gives me, a sense of protection, but it probably is not doing anything for me,
Yeah.
other
Yeah.
than, although I am like in their face, looking at the back of their throat,
Right.
and there's
Right.
sometimes people will cough right then,
Yeah. Yeah.
So sometimes I guess that's what makes me feel better, is that I have some measure of protection from that.
Right.
But it's really the touching your face thing actually makes it worse, and that's people that are wearing masks, they're touching their face and adjusting a lot. And especially those N95 respirator masks. First of all, those have to be fitted. Those are the
Right.
ones that actually work to protect you, but they have to be fitted to you,
Yep.
and most people don't have the right size. um, and then you are constantly adjusting it, because one, it's uncomfortable. Those
Yeah,
things are
those are
really
uncomfortable,
uncomfortable to wear
certainly. Yeah.
and breathe in,
Yeah.
So
They get very hot, right? Like, as I've had to
yeah.
wear them, and when we do procedures on patients with TB, you wear them, and my goodness, I've done like, lumbar punctures on some of those patients, and
Mm-hmm.
we're in there. I have lead on. I have that the N95 mask, and I'm like, at the end, I'm just like sweating like crazy.
Right.
So yeah, if you're gonna have those, I agree with you. You're much more likely than keep touching your face, because it is uncomfortable. You're going to start sweating.
Right.
It's Yeah,
And that's how those germs actually get from your hands,
right,
to your mucous membranes, where then you're gonna get sick from that. So
right. The
actually
key thing I
probably
think you bring up is a good point, is the touching your face, and then obviously everyone knows this, but no one really does it well, is the hand washing thing.
right.
So
Yeah, I have dry hands to prove.
yes, yes, I know.
Yeah, but yeah, really, we need to be washing our hands so much, and we usually don't do it.
Right,
In
right.
clinic, I do, but at home, it's hard to remember to do it as well.
Yeah, it's
So,
true. And I think that's the biggest thing. But you're right. And then what is it like? What was I watching? I was watching something. John Oliver's HBO show. They did something on coronavirus, and apparently there was a music video done in Vietnam about washing your hands, and then they started doing a TikTok dance out of it and stuff. It was so funny. But they're like, it was the first good propaganda piece that came out of this, because they were like, man. It was only 20 seconds, but that's exactly how long you need to be washing it for. So at least 20
nice.
seconds. So it was,
That's cool.
yeah,
That's
uh,
cool. We should watch that.
yeah,
Yeah, I think when I first heard about the coronavirus kind of excitement, my first thought was, well, maybe this will help control the flu as well, because people
mm,
will be more careful, washing their hands more, and staying home when they're sick, and hopefully that'll help curb the flu spread too. Which, by the way, still kills a lot of people in the United
yeah,
States. Has a vaccine, yet we
right.
refuse to take it. So yeah, it was primary care doc in my daily battle with people trying to get them to vaccinate against the flu. But it really is about, it is about protecting the vulnerable population, yeah, and herd immunity. And we have a vaccine. Yes, it's not perfect. Yes, you may still get it, but it'll probably be less severe when you do get it, if you get it. And it protects the very young and the very old from dying from the flu. And I think that's a very important thing that people forget. And I think when we talk about the mask wearing as well, we have to think about the herd as well. as ourselves. And when we are making the masks too expensive for healthcare facilities, that's when the herd is more at risk. So I think that's why people are really recommending that.
I think that you bring up another good point there is because I was interesting. I saw briefly a blurb about some healthcare workers at a hospital in California um, that I think they may have been exposed to coronavirus. I'm not exactly sure on how, but basically they were talking about then self quarantining, and it was a pretty significant number of I want to say 100, 120 healthcare workers.
Wow.
And so it got me thinking. I was like, my goodness, if that happens at one facility, there's no way that most facilities can handle a loss of that many workers, right?
Right. So true.
And if that that was interesting because I was like, it's not. I bring that up because it's a different conversation in healthcare. Is that what happens when you get sick as the healthcare professional? Um, who backs you up? And most places are not designed to have multiple. Like you individually, maybe okay, someone can cover you. If two or three people, oh, you touch your face. I
Oh,
caught you.
geez.
No,
I didn't
just kidding.
wash my hands.
Just kidding.
That's
um,
it.
but most places are not designed to function with more than a few people missing, right? And so I was
So
just like,
true.
yeah, it may, after this, hope we get past the coronavirus. It may be something that needs to be addressed at healthcare facilities because it's difficult. But there's a shortage of all healthcare professionals right now, and if they get sick, then we're going to have some issues, and or if they don't have access to the protective equipment that we're talking about.
Yeah.
So I think
Yeah.
that's something we definitely need to think about.
Absolutely. Yeah. Whenever I call out from work, which is not very often, but when I call out when my kids are sick rather than
Right.
when I'm sick,
Right.
because I
Right.
have to for them. Um but yeah, it's a huge thing, to call everyone and reschedule them, and some of them are sick and they need to
Yeah.
be seen, and a lot of them can't be, and then they're sent to urgent care or whatever, and it's a huge thing. Like it's a complete, like the system is not made to handle that,
Yeah.
and that's something we definitely need to address, is how can healthcare workers take care of themselves too. And it is so important in an epidemic type situation, a pandemic type situation too, because you might need to quarantine a bunch of them,
Right. Right.
so absolutely, definitely something we need to think about systemically.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. I'm gonna do me a favor. Stop. Let's. You can do the stop sharing.
Oh, right. Yeah. Oops. Stop share.
There we go. Okay. So yeah, I agree. I think this is going to be another week where we start getting more information, and I guess we can kind of see the rest of the world where Italy, Iran,
Hmm.
um, South Korea are the big those places. I think Japan also has a pretty decent amount of cases compared to other places, and we're going to start seeing what China had to go through. You know, about 4 6 weeks ago, we're going to start seeing that evolution in other countries, um, and so it'll be interesting to see what happens because I remember I want to say was it in late January when when China was able to build that massive hospital outside of Wuhan in like 10 days or
Days.
something like that. It
Yeah.
was unbelievable.
Insane.
Um, and obviously, we don't need that yet in the US, but it was an interesting thing to think about. I mean, they have the kind of government that allows that kind of thing to happen.
Hmm.
Um, I don't know that that would ever happen in the U.S. Not because we technically couldn't do it; it would just be difficult to in our system of government to do that kind of a thing.
Hmm.
But hopefully, they definitely did have some pretty significant responses. And one of the interesting things that they said was because the disease, the virus coincided with the Lunar New Year. a lot of people were already home. Then they extended some of those, people staying at home for quarantine for a longer period of time. And there was
Mm-hmm.
a graphic that came out recently, I think it was from NASA actually, that showed the comparison of nitrogen dioxide levels in the atmosphere over China in the same time period last year to now, and that being a greenhouse gas, I think. Um, there was such a reduction because factories were not producing, and so it was massive to see what the change was from January and early February of 2019 versus of now. But I think some of those factories and things are coming back online now. So hopefully the rest of the world doesn't suffer the same kind of numbers of diseases as China. But we'll see. And the best thing we can do is not panic, wash our hands, don't touch our faces, and if you're not a healthcare professional, and you are sick, try to not go to work if you can avoid it. I think those are good advice. I think generally, no matter what the agent is, whether it's the coronavirus or typical influenza or anything else.
Yeah. Yeah. The greenhouse gas thing, I mean, that's huge for that area. I mean, we just traveled to India and we were like in Delhi, and I think we talked about this. Did we talk about this? I'm not sure. Where we were stuck on the tarmac for
Oh,
5 hours
yeah,
because of smog.
right,
That we literally, the pilot, there was no visibility because of smog.
right,
Um, and we couldn't take off for 5 hours on an 8 hour flight. So it was like
right.
turned into a 13-hour flight. It's ridiculous.
Wow.
But
Yeah, hopefully as technology improves, I think we'll start seeing reduction of that kind of thing. But I think
yeah.
um, you know,
And the
for
fact,
the short term, we're kind of in that in between state where
right, right.
the technology is still a little bit too expensive for most places to go on the other energy sources. Although that being said, I just saw where India now has some of the lowest electric costs in the world because of a solar plant that they've put in. So the
That's
trend
awesome.
is quick.
Yes.
So
Yeah. Yeah.
um,
There, India's making some great moves. Like
yeah.
the city that I'm from, Indore, they've cleaned up their act so much. Like it went from being a dirty, polluted city to like the cleanest city in the country,
Oh wow,
just over a few years. And
wow,
it's amazing how quickly people turn things around. And all of a sudden, we have trash trucks, and people are all about cleanliness, and you
wow.
don't even see trash anywhere. It's like
Yeah,
it's
good.
so cool.
Good. That's good. That's an encouraging sign. I know there's some other issues happening right now in India that we won't get into, but
Can't fix it
so
all.
no,
But
no,
yeah.
no. Good. So hopefully we you know helped educate people. Again, we're not recommending any specific stocks or purchases right now. We're just hopefully recommending a more rational mindset. So
Right. Yeah. And because we are doctors and we are investing, we need to know a little bit.
yes.
And the little bit that you need to know is that, like, that you need to know the basics.
Mhm.
And not don't react to the market. The market is bipolar. You don't need to you, you don't need to follow it at all times. Just have your plan.
Right.
And I think that's what I plan on doing, is having my plan, my investor statement, and
Yes.
sticking to that, and not trying to play this market too much. I don't know enough about stocks to try to sell at the low point. Sorry, oh, I just did it. Sell
High point.
at the high point and
Right.
buy at the low point and time that correctly and be right twice. I don't know enough for that.
Right.
What I do know is that I trust that over the average growth of the market, that my money will grow as long as I stick it in a safe place and
Mhm.
don't touch it and don't react to the
Yeah.
market.
Yeah. Again, if you're an investor for the long run, and many of those who are in the physician social media space have probably not experienced too many of these downturns.
Mm-hmm.
I had just started working as a radiologist in the Air Force during the 2008 downturn. And I was in the Air Force, so I wasn't making like, great money, but it was still good money. Don't get me wrong. But, I had colleagues that were, had been in there for longer time periods. And we had some other doctors who were civilian doctors that had been in there for 30 years. And you could see the stress on their face during these downturns. And so it reminded me to always be conservative and position myself appropriately. And it was a good lesson to learn early on. Um, but I do think that, if you haven't, that's okay. You've got years to learn it, but this is not going to be the only time that this happens. And it's, even though it seems like it over the last decade, markets have only gone up. There's been numerous little downturns during that time. 2018 September to December was a pretty significant downturn. We dropped almost 20%. And so, it's going to happen. It's a part of investing. If you don't want that, you can't stomach that, then investing in the market is probably not for you. But know that you're not going to be able to, the best way is like you were saying, just create an investor, policy statement, and then just kind of do it periodically. You don't have to look at it daily. It's irrelevant what happens this week or next week or even monthly for most people. It's relatively inconsequential. It's the long term effects that are important.
Right. Yeah. And I think I'm reading the Intelligent Investor by Benjamin Graham right now, so I feel like I'm
Nice.
quoting a lot of it right now.
Yeah.
That's the market is bipolar as him. But but really, you have to remember the difference between an investor and a speculator. A
Mm-hmm.
speculator is someone who looks at the stock market as an opportunity to buy when it's low and sell when it's high and make money overnight.
Right.
That's a speculator. An investor is someone who invests in a company because they believe in it, or in many different companies, or an entire economy, um, and is in it for the long run. You're in it to give that company or that economy or that collection of companies money, and you trust that they're going to do well over time, and you're going to benefit from dividends over a very long period of time, and you're not as concerned about what their share values are doing
Right.
on a day-to-day basis.
I think we talked a bit about Warren Buffett last week, and I'm going to bring him back up because exactly what you're saying. Benjamin Graham was a mentor to Warren Buffett,
Mm-hmm.
and one of the key things that what you just said is a great point. Is that over the long run, Buffett bought. I think we talked about this last week. He bought Coca-Cola back in the '80s, and
Mm-hmm.
now his annual dividend from Coke is well over the purchase price that he bought. Now, that was 35 years ago, but he never sold it. So he never had to pay tax on the capital gains,
Mm-hmm.
and B, numerous times during that 35-year time period, Coca-Cola stock went up, it went down, it went up, it went down, but it paid Berkshire consistent income, increasing income over that time span that he could then deploy into more Coke or other businesses. And so that's the right mindset to look at your investment, whether it's in the stock market. A lot of people promote real estate for that very purpose, is that, oh, well, I have a consistent income. Well, you can get that consistent income from the stock market too. So,
As long as
dividends.
you're consistent.
Exactly, exactly. So I'm not saying, you should invest in real estate or the stock market. I'm saying that these are both, different avenues, different ways to get to the same goal.
Right.
And so don't believe in anyone that tells you one way or the other way is the right way. Plenty of people have become wealthy from the stock market. Plenty of people have become wealthy from real estate. Whatever you choose is, that's the way you can do it. And you don't have to do one, you can do both. As a physician,
Mm-hmm.
you have that general luxury that you can, probably have enough income to do multiple avenues for investment. So
Right. Right.
but the key thing is that mindset,
Mm-hmm.
the investor mindset, not the speculator mindset that you discuss, is the key. And that's something that we can develop over time. And learning from blips in the market like this, we hope it's a blip, But you know what? We may not. If you're young in the market, you may not hope it's a blip. You may hope for a downturn, and that's
Mhm.
okay.
Mhm.
If you're older and you're longer in the market, you may not want that, but that's okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
But anyway, I think we've kind of belabored that point, but it's a good one to discuss. So good. So what do you have coming up this week? What are you talking about on the Frugal Physician?
Well, I'm talking about I'm going to be talking about the market. I feel like I have to respond to that right now because I
Yeah.
just finished my investment series. Like
Yes.
the worst timing ever.
Oh, I don't think so. I think it's a good time.
Or good timing. Yeah, for
Yes.
young people.
Yes.
Exactly. So I'm going to address that. And then I just finished my no spend month in February. So I'm going to be
Okay.
talking about how that affected my family and we actually picked up on some money saving tricks that we didn't know about before the no spend month because it
Oh,
really kind of
nice.
made us look,
Nice.
for
Yeah.
ways to save money. So I found a couple of different hacks and I'll be sharing those on the blog.
Good. Good.
What
All
about
right.
you?
I have recorded quite a few podcasts recently. I haven't released them, just been crazy busy. But so I'll be releasing a bunch in March. The other thing that I did was a survey of physicians, and we'll be talking about this next week, of their net worth and income. And I had a good number of responses. Somewhere I think I cut it. I stopped it around 230 or 240 responses. Most of them are on the various physician social media groups. And
Hmm.
so I think it was a little bit biased towards those who are interested in finance, probably.
Right.
And so but it painted a much better picture, I think, than the average polls of physicians and how bad we are. And again, maybe it's biased because these people are interested and they're members of these groups that they tend to do a better job. And then the ones who are responding may be more biased because they have good outcomes, I guess. But it was good. It was interesting to see a number of successful physicians out there and maybe doing better even income wise than we thought. We constantly
Hmm.
hear the negatives about physician income and how it's been stagnant, and it has been if we go the same route. But there's a number of physicians out there who are doing well, and it was good. I was pleasantly surprised. So I'll be talking
Cool.
about that. Yeah.
Awesome. I can't wait to see all those results.
Yes, yes.
Cool.
Well, good. This was another good episode, and hopefully you stick with us, our viewers and listeners. So we'll be talking weekly, hopefully, about what's happening in what physicians are talking about in social media.
What's
This is
up,
my take
Doc?
too. What's up? What's up,
What's up,
docs?
docs?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Copyright issues, Warner Brothers. Sorry.
We are not trying to infringe by any means. All right. All right. Good.
All right.